Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I'm your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my co-host, Dr. Tony Ricci. Find us. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Rumble, and YouTube. Our special guest today is Dr. Jay Dawes. He's an associate. Are you an associate or full professor?
I am an associate for another few months, I think.
Oh, he will soon be a full prof of applied exercise science at Oklahoma State University. The Oklahoma State Cowboys it is. So Jay has worked as a university athletic performance coordinator, strength coach, personal trainer, and educator for about, holy shit, 25 years.
I know, Joe. It's shocking, buddy.
I feel like I've known you longer than 25 years.
Yeah, you've known me about that long. So
holy geez. Okay, well, we're all getting old. Son of a bitch. Jay also frequently coaches and provides sports science support to numerous elite and professional teams, as well as law enforcement, and we'll talk about law enforcement, fire and military groups. His main research interests are focused on improving the health, fitness, and human performance for the tactical athletes, first responders, as well as sport athletes. Now, before we get to Jay, Tony, we were talking before Jay came on about the ISSN conference. I want to promote it. It's June 18, 19, and 20, just so people know that is a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it gives people the opportunity to take the entire week off, which most people are doing. And it'll be in beautiful Bonita Springs, Florida at the Hyatt. So if Jay happens to show up, which, you have kids, right?
I do.
They would love it because the hotel has a slide. It has a lazy river. And if you walk through the woods, you hit the beach. And in fact, that's what most of the adults are doing. So they won't even be at the conference.
I was going to say, that all sounds really good to me, not just for kids, but yeah.
Another thing, did you know that, and I was finding these interesting things about Oklahoma. Do you know most college students can't even find Oklahoma on a map? Did you know that?
It's right in the middle. I'm not really sure.
Well, it's like Kansas.
Point. You got a pretty good chance of hitting it.
Just go a little north of the Red, right? Go north of the Red River, and there you are.
Exactly.
I've spent a lot of time there, and actually, it's one of my favorite places because I find it to be some of the best people in the country, and I mean that, man. The Oklahoma people are good people, man.
True.
I mean, I'll tell you what. We moved away for about 13 years, and leaving your home state and then coming back, you get a different appreciation for it. But yeah, as you said, the people here are pretty hard to beat. They really are. Like, just good down home people. So.
Wait, you moved to where? Colorado?
I did. Yep. So 2007, moved to Colorado and was there for 3.5 years. And then we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas for another 3 years. Back to Colorado for 6 years, and then Oklahoma in 2019.
Were you always trying to get back to Oklahoma? Was that the plan, or?
No, man. So honestly, I actually did my master's and PhD at Oklahoma State. So, back 7 years ago, I mean, the dream job was to actually work here. And then I was told, like, hey, not many people actually get to work at their alma mater. So I kind of dismissed that a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, when we were in Colorado for the last stint that I was there, I kind of thought that was going to be the last stop on the Jay Dawes train, honestly. And then lo and behold, the opportunity came up here. And, I grew up about 40 minutes from here, and our family farm is out there. So, it's one of those things where
cool,
it's out there. And so got a chance to come back home, and we actually live on a farm now. So I have a proper compound, and yeah, it's been good.
Going when you try to get a job in academia, things like, hey, you probably won't get a job at a place you got your degree. One of the ones I ran into way back when, in fact, myself and Jeff Stout, was once you work in industry, they'll never let you back in academia. There's all of these sort of weird, these are the unwritten rules of academia that someone has made up and people believe in. It's like, it's such BS. It's like, wait a minute. If you're the best person interviewing, then they're going to take you whether or not you got your degree there.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but both you and Dr. Stout are back in academia. Is that
right?
So
it's funny how that works out.
That's the one thing we talk about universities a lot is somebody at one point said, man, for smart people, sometimes we don't always know everything we think. And it's like, we're not smart people. We're content experts. There's a big difference.
We're content experts, and we are skeptical, curious, and persistent.
Exactly.
Hey, before we get to some of the cool stuff you do, did you know, and I don't know if this is true, but you're an Oklahoma native. Watermelon is officially declared a vegetable in Oklahoma. Is that true?
That is something I was not well aware of.
Okay.
I may actually have to dispute that.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at
my roots and all, but I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
It does have seeds, so it has to be a fruit, right? I mean,
I'm tracking with that, Tony.
exactly. And I didn't know this. The name Oklahoma comes from the Choctaw Indian words for people and red. So
That I did know. So
I'm not getting the red part. Is it red dirt out there? I mean, red. What?
we definitely have a fair amount of red dirt.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Very cool. Okay. Well, the audience is learning some fun stuff about Oklahoma, but we want Jay to edify us on, it seems like you focus, at least academically, on looking at the tactical athlete population. Is that correct?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Tony and I, we've had actually a few guests who talk about the tactical athlete stuff. We had Annette, which I think, wait a minute. Is she moving to Oklahoma?
Yeah, not only is Annette moving to Oklahoma, we just helped out with the walkthrough on her house, which is about 4 minutes from our house.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I've already warned her. I'm like, look, so when I'm out on my farm, you're gonna have to realize you're gonna see some stuff. So I may be cruising across the yard in like cowboy boots and shorts, but whatever. So
That's great.
You know what? That sounds like Florida, but in Oklahoma.
It's not dissimilar, actually, believe it or not. So just more red dirt here, less sand.
We need there needs to be like an Oklahoma man meme, the way there is a Florida man meme.
Yeah, that's a good retirement plan for me, probably.
All right, let's talk tactical athlete stuff. I guess first, for people who don't follow the category, academically, or even just they're interested in it, define it for the audience so that it's, because it seems like we're putting together such different occupations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the easiest way to explain it is, it's the occupational athlete. So it's people who have physically demanding jobs, but more specifically, when we talk about tactical, it's going to be that first responder, military space. So looking at your law enforcement officers, firefighters, paramedics, and military soldiers are really the primary group when you talk about the tactical athlete.
Now, I'm going to take I guess a football analogy. If we go back to, and you're aware of this history, if you go back really to the 1970s, there wasn't really strength and conditioning for football. And then it wasn't really, and I don't know if I have my dates perfectly correct, wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s when the University of Nebraska college football team decided, you know what, lifting weight seems to be good.
Yeah,
and we seem to get, we seem to get bigger and stronger. So this is kind of interesting. So fast forward to now, every college program lifts weights, right? Even the rowing team, the cheerleading team, everybody lifts weights. We know lifting weights is good for you. However, it's become so specialized that now you just have strength coaches for football, but even strength coaches for positions in football, strength coaches just for swimming, strength coaches just for track and field. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is when you look at the tactical population, let's take military versus police, where you're doing different things. I mean, I'm not even sure I'm not even sure they're comparable. So will the tactical athlete strength conditioning community realize that really we got to separate these instead of just using this big generic term? We're dealing just with police or law enforcement. We're dealing just with military. Do you understand sort of where I'm coming with this?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think that's the thing is, Joe, if you look at it in general terms, like we're teaching them to function better as human beings is really what it gets down to. And I think, the one thing that is very consistent across all those different occupations is you kind of have to be ready for anything, because anything may happen. I mean, I'll say this, there's different constraints and there's different things that you would account for, such as like, with a soldier, for instance. So they may have some degree of certainty about when they're going to go on a deployment, what their schedules may or may not look like, at least, a little bit further in advance than maybe a law enforcement officer might. Because like I said, with a law enforcement officer, like as soon as they suit up, for the day, like, I mean, they could be in the fight for the life that afternoon, or they maybe, simply just pulling people over and, writing, traffic tickets. So it's one of the things, like the demand is so highly variable that, I mean, kind of the stance is like, if you have to be ready for anything, we have to train you for everything.
Mhm.
And so, if you look at those different occupations, there are going to be some essential job tasks that are going to cross over between all the groups. Like for instance, like victim extraction, right? So if you have a downed soldier, civilian, firefighter, whatever it may be, you got to be able to, pick them up and drag them from point A to point B just to get them out of harm's way. So that's going to be pretty consistent across the board. So, across the board, some element of strength is going to be important. Um, if you look at like a firefighter versus like a law enforcement officer, like, so a firefighter is going to, I mean, on the job, they're told you don't run, right? Because, if you run on the wet stuff, there's a good chance you're going to slip and fall. That's not a good.
Makes sense.
If
True.
you're an officer, then, there's a good chance you're going to have a quick anaerobic burst where you're doing like quick sprints to, maybe grab somebody who's not super compliant or willing to, be detained. So it's a little bit more of an anaerobic job versus, on the firefighting standpoint of it, it's certainly anaerobic, but it's a little bit more sustained durations and things like that. And that's kind of a wild generality because you could always say, well, what about in this situation? And
Right.
you'd be right. I mean, it's one of those things where I think probably one of the easiest ways to explain is like if you look at tactical athletes across the board, they're all going to have their specialty areas that you have to do a little bit more individualized training for. But similar to a sport athlete, we're training to be an athlete first. And with that being said, they almost need to be like decathletes to some extent.
Mhm.
Like you don't need to be like exceptional at anything, but you got to be pretty good at everything all the time in order to be operationally fit.
So I'm glad you said decathletes and not CrossFit people. Just kidding.
I'm not allowed to comment one way or the other on this. Yeah, I
No,
mean, and I think honestly, one of the reasons people gravitate to that style of training is because they do a lot of diversity within the training. And which, I mean, certainly I would advocate for diversity within the training. I think, there's obviously, as long as you're following scientific principles of, the basics like progression, overload, cyclical load demands and stuff like that. So,
isn't that a little much when you explain this to, let's say, firefighters? I mean, a lot of this must be like, Jay, you're talking your vocabulary. We don't really
nope,
care.
we do not use that vocabulary.
Okay.
So, I mean, so that's the thing is like, that's the good thing is like, I have a good, obviously a pretty decent base of friends that are not in the academic space. And it's one
Yeah.
of those, okay, I need to talk to you in human language that makes sense. So it's like, hey, dude, to keep you like more fit for what you have to do on the job and to make sure you can actually enjoy retirement, here's the things that I think are going to be important for you. And
But
we go,
right. Is there I mean, are there incentives that are built into these occupations to stay in shape? Because I mean, the average person who's not in any of those occupations, the individuals we would see the most are law enforcement. We really don't see firefighters. We don't really see military, but we see law enforcement. Yet it would seem that there's not an incentive to stay in shape. Is that changing, or what are your thoughts?
oh man, it's the Wild West, honestly. I mean, and it's awful to say, but I'll just say it. Like
Say it.
if you walk into an agency, depending on the group, a lot of times it's like walking into a Walmart. I mean, you're gonna see basically a cross section of the whole population.
Huh?
Like you're gonna see some super fit people, and you're gonna see some people that got some stuff to work on.
Right, right.
And, as far as that goes, a lot of it is going to be agency dependent on how much emphasis they put on fitness and how much they value it. I think conceptually everybody values it. One of the things I've said in the past, like they value it to a point, but not enough to invest time, energy, effort, or finances into it. So that is the challenge. It's like, some agencies are willing and able to put those funds into it, and others are not. And I think, that's the biggest challenge I've had is like, you walk into some groups where, they do have a lot of good resources and they can invest, more money into keeping people fit for duty and things of that nature. And then, others where, I mean, they're scrambling just to, fund the basics, basically. So yeah, I mean, it's more important. Um, it is incentivized in some groups and others that's not. So I will say this, like so to kind of back everybody up if they're not familiar with this process. So like looking at law enforcement in particular. So a lot of times, law enforcement officer will, they become a pre-hire, they go to an academy where they're cadets, they go through training where, I mean, typically they spend anywhere from 16 to 27 weeks training in order to become a law enforcement officer. There's a huge element of fitness involved with it to where they're trying to get them as fit as they can. So a lot of times when they leave the academy, they may be in the best shape of their life. And then unfortunately, a lot of agencies, that's where it stops.
Right.
So from that point forward, a lot of the agencies don't have mandatory fitness tests. A lot of them don't require really for you to pass any kind of fitness assessment to maintain job proficiency after you've completed academy. And honestly, one of the main reasons for it is like from a legal standpoint, it's a disaster trying to put that in.
But you said from a legal standpoint, it's a disaster. Why is that?
So, well, all right. So let me pose a question. So how many push-ups do you need to do to be a good officer?
Oh, I don't know, more than 3, but less than 100.
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's about what I could tell you right now, Joey. So, and that's the problem is like, I mean, so again, push-ups are not the job, obviously, but there is obviously a manifest relationship between, okay, people who tend to be more fit, who do more push-ups tend to do better on certain aspects of the job. But when it becomes like, okay, if you can't do 30 push-ups, you don't have a job anymore. Then the argument's like, okay, well, why not 29 or why not 31?
Right.
And it's really, I can't really make that argument for you. It's hard.
Right.
So it's really funny. And I kind of alluded to this when we were talking before, but the whole like sports science aspect of all this and trying to look at, okay, what are your minimal level thresholds and cut scores for job proficiency? I mean, you're really trying to say like, okay, it's not, let's take our top 10% and go get them, right? It's like, okay, how bad can you be and still do the job? And it is insanely hard to get to that number. And it's
really,
yeah, because I mean, people can be pretty bad and still do marginally okay. But I mean, obviously, the job benefits being more fit.
wait,
No question.
I want to know how bad you could be.
I mean,
how about this with aerobic conditioning? Is there a mile timed run or a 12-minute run, or is there a way to assess that?
So normally, I mean, we'll do like a 1.5 mile run. I mean, and honestly, like it's nothing exceptional. Like, I mean, if you're hitting like average scores for your age and sex, but you cannot use age and sex, by the way, for
well, what are you using?
Occupational standards, but you can use that to to estimate VO2. But if you're in that range, you're probably going to be okay on most things.
Interesting.
Age and sex are no-nos as far as creating an occupational standard, because now it becomes even a bigger legal issue because now you're discriminating.
Well,
I would imagine too then, Jay, like that we run into the same problem with assessing weight, right? Or
that's
BMI, because, and I say this with care and concern, not to mock anyone, but in what you've said regarding being prepared for the unexpected, that's very hard to do when you're not close to your factory weight. And when things really hit the fan, and you're not close to the weight that way you function optimally, you fatigue quick and things go really bad really fast. So,
well, I mean, and I think that's the thing, Tony. And yeah, to your point, I mean, there's nothing about these jobs that are conducive to health and fitness. I mean, there's not. I mean, one, in addition, to the fact where a lot of times, even though you have to do things that are really physically demanding, and a lot of times they go from 0 to hero, the reality of it is like there is a lot of sitting around time.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of that is like you're under load. So when you're doing those things, I mean, you'll have anywhere from 20 to possibly 40 to 60 pounds of extra gear on your body that it just creates more physiological burden. So it doesn't help performance any. So I mean, it's like to your point, if you're already unfit before you get that stuff on, it's not going to make life better once it's on.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah. So now, and I will say this, like, I mean, I can definitively, I mean, we've got all the research to show you, like, more fit people tend to do better on tasks. But the problem with it is you have to go like, okay, what is on all these different occupational tasks, like, what is the minimum threshold we're willing to accept? And then looking at those profiles, going like, okay, at a minimum, you need to do this in order to be proficient. So.
And one more question. I'm sorry, Joe.
No, go ahead.
In most cases, is this set by so for example, Is it municipality? Is it state? Or it's not federal, right? So, for example, what you're saying regarding, well, we can't do this or legally this, is that legislated in most cases locally or at a state level, or where is that law coming into play in most cases?
It's usually different for every group.
Okay.
Yeah, and every agent. So I mean, even in Stillwater, for instance, like we've got the Stillwater Police Department, we've got the Oklahoma State Police Department, we've got Payne County Sheriffs. So we have 3 different groups that function together, but independently as well.
Okay.
Now, granted, on those, there is no occupational standard for fitness once they graduate academy. But each one of those basically are kind of left to their own devices to choose if they wanted to, what that number would look like. Yeah, so it's not mandatory.
Got it.
Well, and to get like one of my first experiences, after I left the NSCA, so Joe, you know this, so we started the tactical program there, and it was great. And we worked with a lot of high-end operators and SWAT folks, and then went out to work with people who were not really at that level yet necessarily. So like more general duties and stuff like that. And there was a situation where there was a group of pre-hires that sued a training academy because they couldn't do 22 push-ups, so they weren't allowed into the academy. And so they all were females. It was found that it was actually considered potentially discriminatory because there was no reason that the number 22 was kind of arbitrarily set. Usually with a lot of those things, like they kind of go to the chief, they're like, okay, how many push-ups can you do? That's the minimum standard. So not really, that's kind of a joke, but I mean, a lot of times the number is kind of arbitrary. So there's, I mean, they could say, you know what, 30 sounds like a good number, and that's what they set. But I mean, as soon as you go into court, the question is like, okay, is it absolutely necessary for you to do this number of push-ups to do the job?
Right.
That's where it falls apart. So in this situation, these females were not able to do 22 push-ups. They sued, ended up settling out of court for a pretty large sum of money. Were allowed into the training academy, and upon graduation were granted hours toward pension and advancement as well. And the commander asked me, he's like, hey, is 22 push-ups unreasonable? And I was like, well, it's not, but I can't prove it makes you a good officer. That's the problem.
Right.
Like Joey said, 3 to 100.
Right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't even know how you would set up a randomized controlled trial to examine that.
And Joe, we have tried, and I will tell you this right now, like, and again, at some point I may change my mind, but as we are right now today,
you're trying this.
We've done different things. So basically, I mean, we have ran officers through a series of fitness tests and a series of occupational tasks. With that being said, I'm not an officer, so I'm not the expert as far as that goes. Like, I'm an expert in physiology and strength conditioning and all that. So for every one of the occupational tasks, we had 4 independent officers as subject matter experts rate performance on every single test. And so in that, we were trying to find consensus on, okay, what's good, what's bad. And once you tell me what's good and what's bad, it becomes kind of a math game at that point. But one of the things we found is like there's kind of a wide variability on what's considered good and bad, even within the SMEs. Like for instance, we did a victim drag. So we decided that the victim drag needed to be, so this was with a patrol agency. And so in order to set up that assessment, we had to know 3 things. So what was the weight of the dummy? How far do you need to drag them? And then what time is acceptable? And so with this particular group, the average weight of the officer was 205 pounds. So like duty belt gear and all that was about 225. So we thought, okay, that's reasonable to say you may have to pull one of your colleagues out of harm's way.
Makes sense.
They really didn't like it because at that point, they were using a 120-pound dummy.
Oh, well.
Yeah, which I get it. Like, I understand not liking it, but like, okay, the reality is like, this is probably more reasonable. So we set the weight at 225. We determined that from the center of the intersection to the, for the median to the shoulder of the road was 8.54 meters. So we set that at 8.54 meters. And then it just got down to time. So it was like, okay, what's a good time? What's a bad time? So we had people drag somebody that distance everywhere from 3.8 seconds to 18.4 seconds. And it was deemed that everybody passed. So I'm like, so as long as you're, I guess, somewhere between almost 4 seconds and 18, you're sweet, I guess. So
Wow.
yeah, so I mean, so that's what becomes kind of the challenge is like it's really hard. I mean, how so the other, I guess the other part of it is like, is what are the constraints of the situation? Right. So I mean, if you're under fire or you've got, a car racing down the interstate, you probably need to move them faster than slower.
Right.
If that's not happening, you got a bit more time. So you kind of almost have to go to worst case scenario, but again, there's a lot of worst case scenarios that could be plausible. So
Yeah, it almost seems like, and I don't know how many people are doing what you're doing, but you just have to collect enough data on literally thousands of individuals. And you're basically going to create, okay, it's sort of like the old height weight charts that insurance companies would have. Like if you,
yeah, exactly.
if you're this height or weight, you will not live as long as this height or weight.
Uh,
And
and it's not perfect, but it could be okay in certain situations. Yeah.
right. None of these are ever perfect. I guess, it's I guess the analogy would be the NFL combine. You have guys, these big guys who run, I mean, some of these big guys are running 4.7 seconds and they're over
Yeah.
300 pounds. But I always say, well, but can he block? I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly.
He might be fast running straight ahead, but he's still got to block.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's the challenge, man. There's so many other factors that go into it. So like, I mean, in a, defensive tactics and arrest control scenario. So if you're fighting, basically, it's not always the strongest person. It's the one that has the best skills that can, I mean, you can overcome a lot with skills. Now, granted, the more fit person in general terms is going to have, an advantage in a lot of ways if the skills are commensurate with the person who's less fit. But yeah, I mean, trying to help guide and steer it's a challenge. So,
so if we're going to wave the magic wand and
all right.
you are the boss. Okay. You're the boss. You
Yep.
get to decide and you are going to train. Let's say, it's Stillwater Police, the city.
Yep.
And you get to train them, and the chief of police is like, you know what, you're the boss, you get to train them. What would you focus on knowing the population in terms of, muscular endurance, muscular strength, aerobic fitness, et cetera, et cetera? So what would you focus on?
Yes, all that. Well, and that's actually the cool thing, man. Is like we have a great relationship with Stillwater PD, and we do a lot of work with them. And again, there's some of the folks down there that they don't really need me. It's just like hey, I need a few tips. I'd like to knock some rough edges off. What can I do? And for those folks, we're trying to give a little bit of extra guidance and different things that they can do to kind of help them out with different problem areas and stuff like that. And then there's others that have a little bit more to work on. But yeah, I mean, it really, to some extent, all of it is really what we need to focus on. I think, it's just like anything else. It's like your SWOT analysis. Like, okay, what's your biggest threat?
Mhm.
And that's the thing we need to hit first. And, a lot of times, kind of the mantra I say is like health, fitness, and performance. So number one is like, okay, from a health standpoint, like, are you a healthy human being? That's
Right.
because if you're not a healthy human being, everything else is going to be a problem. So let's just work on let's become a healthy human being first. And then once you're healthy or healthier, we're going to start building some capacity on that, which is your fitness. And then from the performance standpoint, a lot of that is their specific tasks and things that they're trained to do. But, some of it is doing, more your speed, agility,
Right.
power work and things like more specialty type stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's really just trying to build that foundation. Now, the irony of it is, I'm saying like, okay, we want to make sure a healthy human being first before we go into these more advanced things. But still, the reality is like on any given day, you might literally be having to throw hands and get somebody to the ground to make sure that you may be in a full-on like Greco-Roman wrestling match, but you're not fit or healthy, but you're still gonna have to do it because that's your job. So that's where it gets really challenging. So like, to some extent, like I have to make sure that you're as reasonably prepared for this as possible. But at the same time, I don't want to get you hurt in the weight room. I mean, if you get hurt out in the world trying to save yourself or somebody else, that's a little bit easier to tolerate versus, okay, Jay did something dumb in the weight room and got you hurt.
Well, that's what you get for putting him on a Swiss ball and having them squat with one leg.
I'm not going to do that a third time.
That's funny. So what projects do you have going on now in terms of this specific population? And are you also doing any projects that are not related, specifically to tactical athletes or the tactical population, as some would say.
Yeah, I mean, I still do a little bit in sports. I think that's the cool thing is that when you look at both populations, there's definitely that crossover element to it. So a lot of things that we do in the sport community, we're trying to take those higher level strength and conditioning concepts and bleed them over into the tactical space with all the different challenges they may have. But yeah, we have several groups right now that we're working with. Some of that is trying to help stand up some in-house wellness programs. So looking at it from a physical fitness standpoint, on my end of it, nutritional, and then also trying to actually incorporate mental health. So we actually work with a lot of like mental health professionals and things like that that are helping provide services for those folks. And really trying to look at that holistic approach where you're blending everything together. So those are some big projects that are going on right now. We're doing some additional work with the DoD that's looking at some, long story short, physiological measuring type things, which it always sounds really cool. It's like I really can't talk about it. It makes me sound cool. It's probably not that exciting, but let's just assume it's super top secret and it's awesome. And then also we're in the process of creating a tactical athlete readiness program. So basically for your pre-hires. So for people who, before they go into academy, it's to help get them as fit as possible so they can actually survive academy training.
So this is like NFL combine training.
Pretty much, yeah. So I mean that's one of the things that, man, if you look at like training academy, like a lot of academies have a pretty decent, I don't want to say washout, but I mean a lot of times if injuries are pretty high in training academy.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. So that makes sense to prep in advance, right?
Yep, and that's exactly it. Is like, one, it's probably one of the most stressful times in their career as far as like, when I say that, we look at day in, day out, just the amount of, I mean, you're trying to pass your coursework, you're, doing a lot of physical work at the same time. And, there's no guarantee you're gonna have a job. So you're, basically you're just trying to survive that process. I mean, it's like Army basic training to a point. And, some groups, it is very much like that, where it's more paramilitary style, where you're actually living in-house at the location for, the 27 weeks and, whatever it may be. So, during that time frame, there tends to be a lot of injuries just because of, the stress and, communal living and, things like that. So, yeah, in part, what we're trying to do is reduce the number of injuries that are seen, so that actually translates to more officers on the streets. Because I think that's the challenge. Like a lot of times, a lot of times, we look at that one injury, but we don't think about the downstream effect of it. So, that one injury that they see in academy, I mean, it can cost a organization. I mean, usually from the groups I've worked with, anywhere from $180,000 to $200,000 per person. So if you lose 5 people, you just lost $1 million for state. And so if they get injured, a lot of times they'll recycle and go back to the next training academy. But sometimes depending on the severity of the injury, it may be a couple before they can get back in. In the meantime, that leaves them short-staffed. So that's fewer people out in the public on the roads and doing the job. So now, you've got officers who are already on duty having to pick up extra shifts, and and again, with those professions, like sleep is always a massive issue. Trying to eat healthy, maintain your fitness. So if you're having to pick up extra shifts, that doesn't help anything. So again, that kind of leads to burnout of your people who are already your incumbent officers who are already boots on the ground. So yeah, so basically it's one of those things where, I mean, like anything else, if you can influence the pipeline and make sure that they're coming out healthier and able to endure better, then hopefully that influences the culture and the the whole organization.
Do you ever get questions about diet or supplements? Like what do they ask you?
Oh man.
Or how, I guess before you answer that, how is their diet in general?
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
I mean, it's like, again, it's like the general population. You got some people who are really dialed into performance eating, and you got some folks that are kind of on the state fair diet. I mean,
wait, you mean the state fair? They have those big turkey legs. I mean, that's protein,
sure.
buddy.
That's good. Yeah, but I mean, when you mix with cotton candy, that's a problem.
You got fried Oreos too. Don't forget those at state fairs.
No, man. I mean, that's the thing about it is, and I think that's. And Joe, I think you were on the board of directors for the NSCA when we originally came up with the tactical athlete concept and doing all that. And you think, oh man, everybody's got to be super concerned about this, and obviously they want to be occupationally fit. But I mean, it's just, I mean, honestly, it's like people that smoke. Like, it's like, you know, if it happens to me, it happens to me, and you know. So I mean, but yeah, you get varying levels of concern, really. So it's. I think the thing I love the most about this space is it's kind of the perfect blend between high performance and kind of like personal training.
Mm.
Right,
So
right.
it's kind of that in between space. I mean, because you get a dude like me, I'm 47. I can still do everything I did when I was 20. It hurts more, it takes longer to recover, but I can still.
Right.
And I think, you know, you've got, you know, people like that who are still trying to maintain and, you know, get through the career and you know, be successful. And, you know, then you got, you know, other people that, you know, they've let some things go and you're trying to get them back, you know, back on board. But yeah, but from a nutritional standpoint, man, I'll be honest, there's a few things that I can't even say on your podcast that are they're actually pretty shocking, actually.
Well, hypothetically,
Super funny. But yeah, I can't say it on here.
darn.
But but yeah, no, I mean you'll get a pretty diverse questions that come through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, you've been in the nutrition space long enough to know what you deal with. I mean, expect anything. I mean, I'm pretty fortunate. So with our lab at Oklahoma State, we have Dr. Jill Joyce, who she's a registered dietitian. So if there are any, you know, questions that go beyond like, you know, just general nutrition education, I can refer them to her, and they can get a little bit more dialed in with stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, the general question will be like, you know, how, you know, do I need to focus on macros or calories? You know, do I need to, you know, how many should I be getting? And quick plug, ISSN, like the position statements are a really good resource because I usually say like, hey, this is going to give you some general ideas. This will get you in the ballpark. If you want to refine it, you can kind of tweak and play with it. But yeah, I mean, you do get some showstopper stuff. I mean,
Well, the irony of it is that it's probably the same questions we've been asked for the last 30 or 40 years. They just keep getting recycled.
yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, and that's the thing, man, is like you start, you know, and I used to think about all these crusty older strength coaches when these questions are like, why are they so angry about stuff? It's like, oh, because it's literally the same. It's just, it's like, oh, because it's cyclical, is what it is. So,
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it is true. When you're in the category long enough, after a while, you're like, holy shit, I wonder if people are learning anything. Because I
yeah.
heard this when like Ronald Reagan was president. So,
Well, but I think this is the funniest thing about it too. I mean, when Reagan was president, I mean, if you had an egg a day, there was no question you were going to die.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
exactly.
And that's like a superfood. I'm like, all right, well, somewhere between that again.
Now,
So
you talk about someone who deserves to sue, and it's the egg for being wrongfully prosecuted. I'd be suing.
That's true. The egg has been lambasted more than any other food. Maybe milk is a close second. People
That's
beat the crap out of milk, you know. But
I just have a quick question, Jay. It's a little off, but it's not related to it. But I would imagine too in recruitment for these jobs, I got to think there are regional disparities, and what I mean by that is particularly how first responders are viewed, right? In certain areas now, it's really not that many people want to go into it, but I would think in Oklahoma, I think it's my best guess is it's a little bit more appreciated, rightfully so. And the attitude toward the first responder police officer is probably better than in some places. So are the departments there okay in recruitment? Are they able to generate enough candidates or?
yeah, honestly, no. I mean,
No? Okay.
everybody's struggling right now.
Got it.
I'll say this again, by and large, like everybody, and again, not just shameless plug, but everybody that I've worked with here in Oklahoma has been amazing. I mean,
They're great people, I know.
human beings, you know, want to do the right things.
Yeah.
You know, as far as you know, the general climate and culture for law enforcement here, I mean, it is reasonably law enforcement friendly.
Yeah.
But you know, if you look at the overall selection pool that they're trying to get, it's a shallower pool. I mean,
Okay.
you know, again, because there has been so many negative things toward officers over those
Yeah, that's why I asked.
years. And you know, and then, you know, with that being said, you know, not to use the C word, but COVID, you know, with that, you know, we've got students that are coming into the university. So with our ROTC program, like one of the things we saw is their resistance training age was significantly lower than the previous classes that came through, which kind of makes sense because they were at home.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so the bad thing about it is, like, they're not quite as fit as some of the previous groups that were coming in. And now we got fire, police, and military trying to get the same pool of fewer people. So
Right.
it's really creating, I mean, it's really almost, I would venture to say it's a public safety, national security issue at this point. So
Well, I know in Florida we love law enforcement. Because you know why? They actually enforce the law here.
Yes, as does Oklahoma. And that's why I asked, at least,
Yeah.
because in some areas it's been quite challenging. I know that recruitment and no one wants to become involved with it anymore. And then on top of that, the pay isn't always great in some big cities where
Yeah.
it's very hard to live to begin with. But I was hoping that wasn't the case where you were. But I would imagine that the recruitment opportunities still probably better than they are in a lot of other areas.
I think Tony's referring to his former home of New York City.
Yes, well, the home that I've always, avoided, and spent half my life away from. So that's
Well, but I mean, yeah, I mean, like you said, there, obviously regionally and geographically, there's going to be some challenges.
Yeah.
I think, in general terms, in the South, people tend to be a little bit more law enforcement friendly.
Yeah.
I think some of the challenges, like in the South, I mean, all the other things that go along with health disparities in the South.
Yeah, true.
So those are some of the things that we try and kind of work through. But yeah, I think, to both of y'all's point, like when you're looking at the recruitment process, like it's harder on everybody now. So I think that's kind of the other part of trying to make sure that, okay, the people that do actually show up, let's make sure you can get through training
Great point.
and that you can, get to that point. Because I mean, again, from a public safety standpoint, this creates a way bigger issue than, just, hey, we can't find, good recruits. I mean, it's a significant challenge as far as, our society in general.
Yeah. But it holds greater value for what you are doing is to make sure they're physically prepared, helping out and mentally prepared prior to academy to the best of their capacity to ensure less dropout and, greater success rate. So that it's even more important what you're doing there now.
Yeah, we sure hope so. And I think, the other part of that too is like looking at it across the occupational lifespan, because, again, in general terms, people in these populations don't tend to have the same life expectancy as people who are in the general population. So I mean, if you look at age and sex matched, people in these professions don't tend to live as long.
Wow.
And that's probably for a whole variety of different issues.
Yeah.
But, I think if you look at it from a stress standpoint, it's a good friend of mine one time said, he was an officer. He said, Jason, the thing you don't understand, he said, when you are in the parking lot, if you drop your bottle of water and you pick it up, you just pick it up. If you got a uniform on and you pick it up, you're vulnerable and you're a target. So you're just always like hyper aware of everything going on around you.
Right.
And I really hadn't thought about it that way before, but he said, yeah, you just have to. He said, you kind of play the what if game all the time. So what if X happens? What if Z happens? And he said that keeps you safe, but it also keeps you kind of amped up. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
mentally that's very taxing and has to have like negative sympathetic influence after a while and stress and really challenging on the body and mind, definitely.
Yeah. And that's, and again, from the fitness standpoint, I mean, with fitness and nutrition, we certainly can't undo everything the job is doing to them, but we can certainly make a pretty significant impact. And then I think it's, the better you go into those stressful situations, the better you're able to moderate and tolerate those stressors. So.
Well, Jay, next time I see you, you're going to have to fess up as to what those nutrition things are that you cannot mention publicly.
I will.
I am highly curious.
It doesn't involve barnyard animals, is all I can tell you.
Okay. I cannot wait. Now, okay, before we let you go, are you, what conferences are you going to? If someone wants to find you, are you speaking again NSCA or ACSM or any of the other ones?
I'm actually, the next conference I go to is NSCA National. So I'll just be there hanging out, actually. So no speaking.
Wait, is that in Vegas or Florida?
It is in Baltimore this year.
Oh, it hasn't been there in a while.
It has not. So,
okay.
Yep. So it'll be Baltimore this year. And then the NSCA Tactical event, I'll be there as well.
Where is that being held?
So that will be, that's a great question. I think Norfolk maybe, but I'm not.
Okay, East Coast this year.
Yeah. So, but those are, I mean, honestly, great events to go to. But yeah, I mean, if for anybody listening, if you found anything useful or, I mean, not useful, and you just want to tell me how terrible it was, like, I'd love to chat and try and redeem myself. I'm happy to do that.
Here come the emails. Okay, his email is no.
Yeah, exactly. Jay inadequate at.
I mean, before I let you go, it's almost as if the space you're working in, it reminds me of where sports nutrition was back in the 90s, where it was sort of like, well, we kind of really don't know. We're just kind of trying to figure this out. And it takes a while before you even can put your hands around the category, because there are legal restraints that you have that we did not have. So it's really tough.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, I mean, and Joe, I think to that point, like that's the thing I love about the most is, I mean, it's one of those things where I wake up at 3 a.m. and think I've got the solution, and then by 6 a.m. I'm like, that was dumb. No, I mean, but I think that is the thing, and certainly we need more people in, the research space, in the practical application space, coaches that are helping kind of push this stuff forward, because I mean, it is everybody learning from one another. And I think that's been the fun thing for me, is like learning from those populations. I mean, because I don't do their job, so they know their job better than anybody. And I'm just trying to do what we can to help complement it and make it better. But yeah, it's a fun area. It's exciting. It's emerging. I mean, and again, if anybody has an interest in getting more into that space, I'd be happy to talk to them more about it. At least
Awesome.
what not to do from my personal experience. So,
hey, you know what? Knowing what not to do is important too. So
saves you a lot of time, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
So it is Dr. Jay Dawes, Oklahoma State Cowboy. Hey, it's been great to have you on the Sports Science Dudes. Tony, I don't know if you have any final words for Jay before we let him go.
Great. I just real interesting, and I think what we really got out of this, several things, but the work's important and it's needed, and you're doing some great stuff out there for them, Jay, because again, we got to keep them healthy, make sure if they get there, they graduate and can fulfill the job duties. So this is, it is both national security and safety involved. So great work out that way.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. You enjoy Oklahoma, the one state no one can find on a map. So
thanks, fellas. You're always welcome.
It's a great place.
Hey, thanks, buddy. Bye.
Okay.